So, welcome everybody to the R4DS discussion. We are going to be talking about chapter 21, which is databases, and Stephan has graciously decided to lead us in this discussion today. Like we've talked about before, our format is a little different than previous cohorts. What we do is we open it up for conversation about any difficult topics that people may have, and then we expand it into going through the exercises. And so, with that, I'll just pass it on to Stefan and let you lead today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. I also should preface that because we're at home and some people are coming in the apartment later, I might have to very abruptly leave, but I hope we can at least cover all of the exercises. I should be at least able to stay here for 20 or 25 minutes, but I wanted to just give a heads up. Sorry that just changes here. Okay, yeah, so I looked at the exercises. Does anyone have anything they want to share? So one of the things let me step back. One of the things that sticks out to me, because I haven't really done that much uh, connection to the internet to do something. Like usually all the stuff I do is locally. I didn't have to connect much to databases. I mostly work with CSV files. So one of the things that stuck out to me is that you have those objects that you generate where you connect to a database. And I think the same is true. That might be other APIs or internet connections where you have this object and then you can send requests basically to that connection. But that stuck out to me. Can everyone see my screen? So one of the first steps is here that you do this DB connect from the DBI package. And then with that connection, other commands that you do downstream, you basically send those commands to that connection. So that stuck out to me. One other thing I know, but I haven't looked much more into it because in this particular case, they use DuckDB, what was the term of it? It's also an in-process database. So it's not a server-side database or cloud database. It's just spun up locally on your computer, for example. And
Yeah,
it's
so
similar
it's
to SQLite, right? Sorry, yeah, please, Colin.
yeah, it's so the way I understand it, it's an in-memory database. Its main purpose is to serve as like an analytics database. So it's not transactional by any means, or it's not meant for transactional database purposes. There is, I'll post it and I don't want to hijack it, but there was a conversation at Posit last year from one of the creators of DuckDB, and I think it's a really interesting tool. But yeah, it's in memory, so it's not like you can make it distributed, I think, but like on the internet, but like its main purpose is in memory database for analytics purposes.
Yeah, and people are very excited about it because it's very fast, right? When it's optimized. And so the other thing I wanted to mention, so the other package that was used is dbplyr, which basically gives you the dplyr verbs, but it works with a database. And I think there's now a specialized package called duckplyr. How this differs from dbplyr, if that's even more optimized for a DuckDB database, I don't know. Maybe Colin, you know anything about it, but I know that I think when this book was written, duckplyr might have not existed or be very early on. So that's maybe also something to keep an eye out for if you start working with duckplyr and DuckDB. Okay, so that was a new concept for me that I have encountered from time to time, but never had to work much with it. And then, is there any other observations by people they want to share? So for me, it was this connection thing, and it makes it just you basically have to know the commands that you have to do connection to database, and sometimes databases have many data. What do you say? No, data tables on it. Is that correct? So you have to also then sub-select the correct one. So that's kind of special. And yeah, that stuck out to me. If and is there anyone else who wants to share something about databases? Otherwise, I'm gonna talk briefly about the exercises, but they were pretty straightforward.
I mean, how much time do you have?
Okay, yeah, that's also true. I think one of the I have learned SQL a long time ago, like I think almost 10 years ago. I played around a little bit with it, but I never needed it for work. It was just personal interest. And so I knew a little bit of SQLite. I think what's really interesting in this chapter is that it's kind of nice to have this option where you have use your database and then do the typical dplyr interaction, and then you can show the query, because that kind of helps you to find out how you would write a SQL command. So I think that's kind of nice if you're more used to the verbs or commands from dplyr to kind of learn more about SQL, how it does things. I think that's very, very helpful. And I also thought it was interesting, like the sequence in which the different, what are they called? Clauses are evaluated in a SQL query. So there is a certain sequence, and it talks in the chapter about it, that sometimes things that are kind of straightforward in your dplyr pipeline, they're actually awkward because you have to subset one, do one SQL request and then subset that use that further. So that also stuck out to me. Yeah, exactly. I don't know where now I don't find where the example is, but yeah. So I thought that was interesting to be aware of. Have people worked a lot with SQL? Like I said, I only did it out of personal interest, and I know it's super prevalent. A colleague of mine, she just started working with the data set we have here at the university, and I said, oh, I worked in R here. I have this repo if you want to take a look. And she was like, oh, no, she does everything on SQL side. So she does all the SQL queries.
We are heavy SQL. Well, oh, some of the stuff that we use, they made reference to a cloud database service called Google BigQuery, and one of the interfaces to work with that is SQL, and so we do quite a bit of SQL where I'm at.
Okay. And so what sticks out to you, like, or what is your experience with working? No, I don't find, oh, here. What sticks out for you with working with SQL databases in R? Is there something special to consider?
Mm,
Are you using, for example, dbplyr, or is it too limited? I could see that maybe sometimes you need the actual SQL query to get what you want. What's your experience in that regard? Or does it translate very well?
my it's always been my biggest consternation, trying to connect with databases, and I think this can translate to anybody, is figuring out the authentication is always I think anytime that I've tried to connect with anything, it's figuring out the authentication has always been the hardest part. Like, and that's one thing, and I get it, like that's like a security thing. Um, and they're not going to dive deep into that subject in this book, but like that has always been the hardest thing for me to do, is to figure out how that actually works. Because sometimes it's more than just like finding the port name, finding the host name, passing like a username password. Um, but that's just like that's always a struggle. They do make mention of that. Um, we usually write raw SQL. dbplyr looks really interesting to be able to translate this, like, because a lot of dplyr is based off of operations in SQL. Like some of the naming conventions are the same, some of the operations are the same. So it's really neat. I mean, I think there's some quirkiness to it, and I haven't played around enough to identify all the quirkiness. But I think some of the exercises have like one of those like, things that you don't necessarily expect to happen using dbplyr. But um I don't know. Like I said, the biggest thing trying to work with R in databases in my experience has been just like the authentication thing, and figuring that out has always been a struggle. But that's my only critique of working with databases in R.
Okay. Okay. Um, one thing with authentication that comes to my mind, how do you work with credentials? This is a tangent, I realize that, but I find it interesting. I just recently watched a video where someone still put, I think, uh, plain text API key into the R profile or into R environment dot R profile dot R environment variable. And I'm pretty sure there's a package called keyring where you can actually like just authenticate in your local session instead of putting your key anywhere, your API key anywhere plain text. And I mean, obviously they, only generated it for this video and then deleted the API key. But I thought it was interesting not to point out that actually, you always think you're never gonna commit it to your repo, but those are like typical breaches, right? Is that your experience too? Like, do you use something like keyring or something else to store your credentials?
Um, so I'll first preference it by saying I am not a security expert. So anybody watching this in the future, like follow your organization's process for doing that. Um, I mean, we follow general conventions of like don't commit any keys, don't commit any like raw text authentication into um, version control. Um, it depends on the system, right? And it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to do it interactively in your like R session, or is it some shiny app that's working in
Yeah. No.
some other environment? So that's going to dictate like how you actually do that. And again, like I am not a security expert and I don't think I could comment like what is the best practice for that. But really we haven't used anything like keyring or anything like that. But it's mainly like if you do have a key, it's going to be on
Yeah.
like a password protected device, right? Or environment. Um, but yeah, it's the biggest thing is it's just like don't leave the keys on the dashboard kind of thing. Like don't put things into version control. Don't write it into your code. Have a separate file for those keys that don't get pushed anywhere other than your local environment. But again, it just depends on the system and how it does it. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Okay. Cool. If there's no other comments, then I would just go through the exercises. Is there anything else someone want to share about the chapter?
I don't want to hijack it from anybody else, but I did find it a little confusing when it did like, I mean, it made sense to me, but when it did like the table connection or the TBL connection flights, like that was a kind of a confusing concept to me a little bit, where like okay, so the basic process I understood was like we kicked off DuckDB, we created some tables, we put some data into the tables, but then we use this function called TBL with the connection object referring to whatever table we want. But then it was a little unclear to me about like, okay, if we want to use that in our SQL query, it made some reference to like it will return some of the data, but it won't tell you how many rows are in it. And I didn't really understand that concept as much. And I didn't think I totally understood what was going on there. But I don't know if we want to talk more about it, but that was what I found a little confusing.
Yeah. So this is the command here you're talking about, right? First here, it actually creates tables for you. I think this is just a convenience function to quickly write the NYC flights 13 data sets to your database, and then to actually have the connection to this particular And now I'm really lacking the correct terms here. What is this data that's on your database? A table on your database. Okay, yeah, of course. So that you connect specifically to that table. Yeah, I think the table function here just helps you to have an access to a specific table on your database, right? Am I interpreting this wrong? And so you have your connection that you built earlier, that you set up earlier to your DuckDB that we had here. And sorry, let me just go over here. That's this one, right? That's your connection. And then after you have the connection, then you actually have to connect to a certain table on it. I think that's what this does. And then you have that object that you probably internally also has all the connection information to your database in general. That's how I understand it, but anyone else knows it in depth or?
I guess the thing that got really confusing for me was that idea of, I think it called it lazy querying, right? Like
Oh,
it's not
yeah, yeah.
like that was where, because like you can do the show query, but then like you ultimately have to submit your query to the system to actually process it. And so like that was where it got a little confusing to me. I mean, if you work with like if you work with Google's like service called BigQuery and you use a package called BigRQuery, you first have to like create your connection, you have to create your query, and then you have to submit your query. And so like that like in between like steps is confusing to me, like how that lazy querying kind of works and how that comes into play.
Yeah. Yeah, I also don't know anything more about that. Anyone else who has more experience with that? The object is lazy. Open pipeline. Mhm.
And maybe it's more on, I mean, I could dig
Oh,
into
okay.
it. Go ahead, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think before you do any, I mean, I don't know, like this is a query. I don't know at what point it actually gets fully executed. Yeah, I mean, I've encountered this a lot, this lazy evaluation kind of thing, right? That it kind of falls under this too. So although this already looks to me like it actually has done something, apparently it hasn't actually executed it. Does anyone else have more experience with this? At what point then actually the query is fully executed and not just this lazy lazy version of it? So we're trying to avoid, okay.
And this could
Oh,
just be
the
one,
collect, yeah, okay. That's
oh,
where you have to
collect.
do collect. Yes. Okay, that makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah,
because it's wrapping around DB get query, which like if you just do DBI, DBI will have that DB get query, which just submits the query to the system, and then it actually returns the data.
yeah,
Okay, that makes sense because the big
yeah,
diamonds DB is just making reference to the table and the SQL query that you're creating. And then the collect is actually what's doing, it's making a reference to DB get query, which is actually submitting it to the system, which then relies on the connection object to actually connect with the system. That makes sense. Um, yeah, that's always like that's always like a it's always been a tricky thing for me to remember when it comes to working with databases is like you have those like extra steps because you don't have your data in session, right? Like when you're working in R, you import your data and it's in memory and you can work with it. And so I always forget those extra steps if you are working with a database that you have to create your query object or have your connection, create your query object, and then actually submit it to the system to get data back.
yeah, yeah. Okay, this is an important part to keep in mind. Okay, cool. Then let's go back to the exercise. Let me just make this small for a second. Where was the exercise? Yeah, okay. So the exercises I think were pretty straightforward. It's just basically to demonstrate how certain verbs in dplyr are translated into SQL queries, and then the other way around, basically, what is the equivalent of creating those SQL queries using dbplyr. And so the first question was just asking, how does distinct and head look like? And so I basically, let me just go to the right thing. So I'm just loading here the packages. So dbplyr and dbi. Then we're creating the connection. Oh, is this also, it's probably too small. Let me just make it a little bit larger. Yeah, it's maybe too large. And then copying over those, copying over the NYC data set and then making the connections. And then, so for question one, I just basically wrote a query using distinct and head, and then show query to see what it looks in SQL. And then down here in my console, you see that select distinct apparently is a way to just get the distinct tail numbers here. I just used as one example. So there's this addition in the select. What was it now called in SQL? Whatever the commands in SQL are called. And then the head function in the dbplyr is translated into limit, and then the number, whatever you passed on. And in my case, it was 5, so it's limit to 5. So the 5 first results. And I thought it was also important, and I think I somewhere read that this totally threw someone off. Like, databases are not arranged in a certain sequence, right? So your table doesn't have an inherent sorting. And so when you write queries and the sorting is important, then you have to make sure that it's part of your SQL query, or in dbplyr that you actually arrange your data. Because otherwise what you get returned will be like random. I don't know what determines that, but you basically don't get the same object back for each of your queries when you do things like, when you, for example, would take the head of 5, because now that your data is not arranged, it might be just random what 5 objects you and 5 rows you get returned. I thought that was really important. That stuck out to me. So anyway, so distinct is translated to select distinct, and head is translated to limit. And then the second question was to express those two SQL queries in dbplyr. And so I just did it here. So the first one, which is, let's just double check, where the departure delay is smaller than the arrival delay. So if you go back, then it's just filter, obviously, in dplyr when you do conditional filtering of your rows. The departure delay is smaller than arrival delay. And then I do the show query here at the end, so I can see the actual output of the command. So then you see here it's select flights, and then here it's where departure delay is lower than arrival delay. So that's correct. One of the things I noticed is that dplyr always seems to translate the star into actually the name of the table dot star. That stuck out to me, and that is also the same in the book in their examples. I don't know why it's different or why that's important. Maybe it makes it more, what's the word I'm looking for? Unambiguous, that it does this notation. But I don't know. Colin, is this something that you would sometimes do directly in SQL, that you do the name of the table dot star? I've never seen that before, so that's, or I don't remember it from the time I did SQL.
Yeah, so
Or
what I assume it's doing is it's aliasing, right? So you technically don't have an alias in your from statement. Like, you could do, like, if you wanted to like limit the name or change the name of your table in your statement, you could go from flights as FLTS, right?
oh, I
And
see.
so
Yeah.
So if you did have an alias in here, so it's aliasing it because your SQL query could have a join in it. And if you had a join and you're selecting specific columns from different tables, because you might have different tables that you're referring to, we have to refer to those alias tables in your select statement. And that's how it does that, is it uses the flights dot, whatever those table names are. So I think it just defaults to it like this with this really simple query.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the second example was that you were creating a new variable here. So the speed variable calculated from the distance and the airtime. And so that would be the equivalent of doing a mutate, and speed in the new variable name is always on the left-hand side. So that's kind of important to remember, I think, in contrast to SQL, that you write a new variable name after as in SQL, while here in dplyr it's always first, and then whatever you want to calculate. And then to also just show that this is correct and gives you the same query they were asking for, I just have the show query here. And yeah, that's the same as requested. So those, I don't know, this was total coincidence. In the last two chapters, I did had very few exercises, but that's all the exercises that were in this particular book. Yeah. So yeah.
I did want to go back to the distinct one because
Okay. Yeah.
I think there's a really important thing that I think, so like if you want a distinct by multiple columns, so like if you
Okay.
wanted to do, and I did like carrier and origin, I think was what I wanted to do, because I think this is a really important distinction when you do distinct, because what might expect SQL to do isn't what dbplyr is going to do. So you can run this to show query. So if I remember correctly, it would do distinct carrier origin, but then that is not the same as like, how can I explain this? It's only going to distinct. Let me show what I was doing here. So it did something really weird for me when I did it on the show query, and maybe I can just share my screen here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, let me see if I can share my screen. So query, share screen. Desktop two. Okay, make sure I got, okay. All right, can you see my screen? Okay,
Yeah.
so let me move this over here. Okay, so this is what I did. So I did the normal DB query, or the distinct show query stuff right here. And then I also tried to like break it doing this, because when you do this, oh, and I also did find that out. That was kind of interesting. If you do SQL distinct like this, distinct carrier, and you actually run it like this, and let's just see if I can go step by step. So here you get the individual carriers, but then if you run it with a second one here, so like distinct carrier origin, which is the dbplyr version, you get the same answer, not expecting it to be distinct based on origin, both on carrier and origin. It's the same thing. So here, 16 by 1, 16 by 1. So you're technically not distincting it, I don't think. I think. So I'm not sure if there's a difference and like just a little bit of a like a leakiness with dbplyr if you have multiple distinct columns. I'm not sure though. That's what I was thinking when I saw this. But that might be a word of caution if you're trying to distinct by multiple
Actually, there
columns.
in your command, there was a mistake because you were not using the other string. If you go back to your
Oh,
example.
this one right here. Oh, and I can bump it up.
No,
Sorry, people.
no.
Oh, sorry.
When you did, yeah, or maybe
Sorry.
when you were running this the queries in SQL
Hmm.
directly. See at the bottom, you do SQL distinct instead of SQL distinct multiple to get the output, where you said that you get the same output.
Oh, well, oh, you might be right. Maybe that is the issue. Let me just check. You might be right. Oh, that is it. Okay, you are right,
Okay.
Stefan. So I just
Okay.
mislooked at it. So I guess that is not a word of caution, then distinct. Because that was my question, was like if you did multiple, would it actually produce what it is? So I stand corrected for future people that I made a very silly mistake there. So thanks for catching that.
A typical mistake. Like it happens all the time.
But I did find out what's really cool is that dbPlyr has this explain, which is really neat. So it actually produces
Oh.
the execution plan for the actual, like, so if you're interested in like optimizing your queries, I don't know if there's anybody on here who gets into that kind of stuff, but you can actually have it explain the execution process for it, and you can kind of dig into this to understand like what's actually happening when the database actually runs your query, which I thought was really, really helpful. So
And it's
um
optimizing it too, right? Yeah. I feel, and that's the reason why you collect at the end, right? Because it actually analyzes all the steps you have and then determines what actually the best uh, sequence of execution is. I think I heard this about DuckFlyer. When you use that package, there's also, I think, an explain or an equivalent command. And yeah,
yeah,
cool.
it's really kind of neat. And then the last thing that I was playing around with head is I wanted to see if I could break it. Um, because you can do like n equals 100, so you can get more instead of doing like the
Yeah.
six. Um, so I saw this. Let's see, show the query flights table. I found out that if you, well, I truly broke it. Whoops. Well, anyways, what happens basically is like if you do show query, like what will happen, like if you do like head equals inf, it just defaults to doing like a select all star.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So it's kind of cool seeing that while I try to break it. So, but I truly, truly broke my session today. That didn't happen last night, but truly broke it. But yeah, I think DB Player is really cool. Like if you don't have the background in like SQL, it's a good way to translate into SQL if you are working with the database and to learn it, because the verbs in dplyr pretty much map onto what's happening in SQL for the most part. So
Yeah. Okay. Any anyone have anything else to share or other words of cautions or something from their experience?
yeah, open it up for the group if anybody else has anything else.
If no one has anything else, I just wanted to say hi. I'm not lurking.
Hi, Shelley.
Hi. I've been wanting to join one of these for a while, and it's on my calendar every week, but or whatever the interval is, and finally tuned in. So, and which is super apropos because I just figured out how to connect my database through RStudio. I've only been able to get the entire table, like 30-year complex environmental monitoring data, lots of stuff there. And I have all these R scripts where I've, exported portions, and I want to convert it to live connection. And so this is super relevant. Thank you.
Okay, awesome.
Cool, that's great. Well, glad you can join. Um, if you don't mind me asking, if you mind sharing, like where are you coming from? What do you do?
I'm an environmental scientist, and I'm in Whittier, California, Los Angeles County.
Oh, absolutely. That's cool. That's great. We have a wide range of people and their expertise and stuff, so it's great to have some more variety. So that's great. Um, yeah, especially if you're working with very large data too, like DuckDB is phenomenal. It is so fast. I am blown away. I mean, if you watch the like the Posit conference talk that I had about that, I mean, it was point blank said like these cloud services, like I think is it called SageMaker and Google BigQuery, which requires like cloud expenses. The person that made DuckDB was like, basically now those are going to be moot technologies because DuckDB is just so fast and it's in memory. And so I don't know if that is a true valid statement, but he made a really compelling case about how awesome DuckDB is and how fast it is to do like analytic stuff with it. And so it's
Cool.
really cool.
Neat. My database is in SQL Server, and I have a database management background before I was doing our stuff, and so I have a ton of SQL scripts that I used to write back in the day, and so I'm trying to connect the two. You know, I tried bringing some directly into our studio, and some worked and some totally didn't. So it's interesting.
So if you have a
Yeah.
lot of experience, one of the things that stuck out to me, or that's also the word of caution, is that SQL is always a little bit different depending on which system you're using. And I remember that when I was playing around with SQLite, that I looked up something else. What is it? PostgreSQL, is that right? Or something, and that didn't work. And then I was, there's different flavors, and that tripped me up.
Yeah, and when I was doing database management, I was doing queries directly into the SQL Server database. And so, yeah, I think that's part of it, is just like having this one step removed. But I'm not trying to write to the database. I'm just trying to
Okay.
extract live, analyses and data visualizations. So, but my big hang up right now is I have all these R scripts that give me unformatted CSV outputs, and I'm trying to convert them into something beautiful like GG table or some kind of formatted table. And I think I'm trying to convert that CSV output instead of taking it back a step and just building it into the output instead of having this, trying to work with the CSV, because it's really, it shouldn't be this hard.
To get a nice formatted table, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And as an output that I can, slide into we haven't hit Quarto yet. We're just still doing Word. But eventually I envision, our reports are the same, year after year. So it'd be perfect for Quarto.
I find one of the challenging parts with the GT package is that it seems very verbose. So whatever you want to do, if you do a little bit of formatting on your table, it gets very long very fast. And I find that quite overwhelming, like the few times I have used it, but I have not a lot of experience with GT. Do you do any summaries or stuff with that? Because one of the things that I also got from the PositConf videos is the GT summary package is quite nice. If you do like, you need counts and stuff like that, it does that all, or percentages, it does this all automatically for you.
I do all kinds of analyses like that. Yeah, I do multivariate analyses, clusters, and
then it's, I think, really worth checking out GT summary. It it has its own like commands you need to learn, but constructing the table is a little bit more straightforward than doing it all like in dplyr and then formatting in GT. I thought it was really interesting. I don't know if anyone else has experience with this package, but it's maybe worth checking out.
Thank you. I will.
GT. I'm gonna write it into the. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And what conference did you say you learned that in?
PositConf. There's the video that Colin posted earlier was from the latest PositConf, and so if you go to the Posit channel on YouTube, they basically after like a month or so post all the videos of the presentations. And there is a talk also on GT summary. And I think it's also accepted by certain journals, like the output of the table is like, it adheres to certain journal styles. So that's also very helpful. And they talk a little bit about it if you want to check it out.
And Colin, you shared that in this chat?
Oh, that was maybe before you
Yeah,
were online.
that's okay. I can figure it out. I was looking at on the YouTube earlier, so I can do a search.
Yeah. And they have a list, like they have a YouTube list. Like if you just type in Posit Comp 2024, you'll find a list of all of the presentations. So
Cool.
yeah, there's a wide variety of topics. Cool. Yeah, I think
Great.
yep. Yeah, you just posted that one, the DuckDB one, and that was one of the keynotes last year, and it was like I said, it was really interesting because it's a new technology that I was like, wow, this is really cool. Well, it's not really new, but it's becoming more adopted, which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I work in an engineering company, and I'm as a scientist, and they all have kind of canned system to do automated reports for them. And
nice.
when I propose that I write a proposal to, for an RFP, and they're said no. So because they've had so many problems with the engineers, so we're left to build our own tools, and that's not a end all be all. We need to do it, get it done, and go on with our lives. So I'm struggling. I'm not a IT person. I'm not a data science person, but as a scientist, you kind of have to have a lot of that knowledge and skill set. So
Well, with your database management system background, I mean, DuckDB is so easy to get up, like started up, like really quickly. Like it blew my mind. Like it just blew my mind. Like a few command lines, like you pretty much just pull it down, install the software, and a few commands, you're up and running and being able to do. It's check it out. It blew my mind with what you could do with it.
neat. Yeah, that's my dream, is to have it all kind of set automated so I can, not spend so many personal hours of my life trying to do this, because our report is every other year. So this is my down year where I can work on this stuff, try to get it set up so I don't struggle so much when that we're waiting for the data to come out, and then it's like, boom, the report's due. So
A good video for that stuff, and I don't know how far along you've gone into that. There's another presentation that was given at it used to be our Studio Con back in 2019. That I can't remember, is it Charla Garlfin? She did a presentation like that one time. Let's see if I can find it and post it in the chat for you. But it was like talking about like that consistent yearly reporting, and I thought her presentation was really kind of interesting. Let's see if I can find it for you. Uh, and if not, I can post it in the Slack. Oh, wait a minute. I have it on my website, I think.
I've been using my employer gave me a subscription to ChatGPT. So I have a workspace account, and I've been asking AI to help me with coding, but sometimes I'll go hours and nope, you didn't get that right. Do it again. Nope, you didn't get that right. And then it's like it loops all the way back around to just nonsense. And sometimes it's good. It can help me get further, but sometimes it takes hours just to get nothing. So
this one that I just shared is really good, kind of that like yearly reporting thing. Cool. It's really interesting. It's a quick presentation. It kind of touches on some of those conventions that might be helpful. Again, I don't know how far along you are, so if it's stuff that's review, like, but it was one of the presentations that I was like, oh yeah, this is so much better to organize my things like this, to do yearly reporting or whatever type of reporting you have. So
yeah, well, that's the other thing, is I've been doing this report on my own for over 20 years, and I'm finally getting a new environmental scientist to kind of learn some of the stuff that has to go into the report. just for some kind of succession plan over the next several years, I can, you know, hopefully pass the baton. And so we're both levels. She's you know, just learning R, and I'm kind of been limping along for decades.
Well, hopefully that video kind
This
of
is
gives
all
you
great.
gives tips. Yeah, excellent.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm going to actually step off because I do have to run to another meeting, but you feel welcome to keep talking. But I really appreciate Stephanie stepping in, and next week we'll talk about
Arrow.
Arrow. Yep. All right, cool. We'll see everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.